Because I own a farm in Ibadan. The day my container came from the port, I thank God for my sister who came to my rescue. We paid money before we could get into the farm. He talked about drugs. Those who follow me on social media, there was a time I wrote about drugs. You don't want to hear about it. I think the percentage of Nigerian youth on drugs is about 80. Various kinds of drugs. From ecstasy to amphetamines to even undefined drugs, dangerous alkaloids from plants like ewe akọ ìbẹ́pẹ. Toba ti shanosi, toba ti mu isheni. And the shepherd and paraga you hear about are steeped in alcohol from these things. That country needs prayers and action. There's so much to talk about. Now let me go to what I came here for. Iponju makes me Yoruba. What else? I owe the inspiration for this topic to my very good friend, enabler and mentor, Professor Pius Adesanya. Give me a round of applause. Bí èkó ló bá júbà ilẹ̀ aláwọ̀. Bí ọmọdé bá mọwọ́ wẹ̀, á bá àgbà jẹun. Ìbà Ọlọ́run, ìbà ènìyàn. Ìbà èyí tí Elédùmarè gbé ilé ayé lé lọ́wọ́. Ìbà ọkùnrin, ìbà obìnrin. Ìbà ọmọdé, ìbà àgbà. Ẹ jẹ́ ojú mi ṣe. The chairman, Senator Femi Odudu. My host, the Afenifere Renewal Group. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen. In pre-colonial and colonial times, it was always in Igba Iponju that we rallied around a Yoruba identity. My task in this keynote lecture is to determine why the adversity model is not working and recommend the necessity of a transcendental Yoruba identity that does not rely solely on the stimulus of Iponju. Unknown to many of us, the mention of the name Yoruba in written tradition was first found in Ahmed Baba's Miraj as-Su'ud, and in Fakh al-Mesul, written by Muhammad Bello. These Arabic writers were the earliest to name us collectively as Yaruba, or Yoruba, as derived from the Arabic alphabet Yaw, Ra, Ba. This was at a time when we were referring to ourselves by our diverse ethnic identities as Ife, Ekiti, Ijesha, Ibadan, Ijebu, Akoko, and so on. Like other major ethnic groups in Nigeria, we considered ourselves as belonging to a city-state or what is referred to as sub-ethnicities today. Each sub-ethnic group was politically independent with its own separate identities. The term Yoruba originally referred only to the people of Oyo, and this thought persisted today, as my Akoko people still describe Oyo traders in places like Ikare as that Yoruba blacksmith near that African maple tree, as distinct from that Iwo butcher at Oba's market. Ìyẹn ni wípé bàbá Yorùbá alágbẹ̀dẹ tó wà ní abẹ́ igi arèrè yẹn ó yàtọ̀ sí ọkùnrin Ìwó alápàtà. Ẹ jẹ́ sọ ìtàn kékeré kan fún. 1976 mo ṣẹ̀bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí dàgbà ni. bàbá mi ní kí n lọ, wọ́n wá kọ ìwé fún mi pé Bámidélé wá lọ sọ́jà lọ ra nǹkan ìlú ọbẹ̀ wa. Ẹran 1 naira 20 kobo, ẹja 50 kobo, bá a ṣe ń lọ láyé ìgbà yẹn nìyẹn. Tó ẹ̀yin tí ẹ jù mí lọ, ẹ̀yin bàbá mi àti ìyá mi tó wà lórí ìjókòó. Wọ́n wá ní tó bá ti dé Alápàtà kó o béèrè Lìádí láti Ìwó. Mo wá wọkọ̀, mo dé Independence Road náà pè bẹ̀ lọ́nà General Hospital. Mo ń rìn lọ tààrà. Mo ti máa ń tẹ̀lé bàbá mi lọ sí odò ẹran ni. Ìgbà tó kù díẹ̀ kí n débẹ̀, ilé Jimoh Aliu tí wọ́n jẹ́ ògbóǹtarìgì nínú eré orí ìtàgé ó wà ní apá ọ̀tún. Mo wá rí wọn tí wọ́n ń ṣètò àwọn nǹkan tó ń fẹ́ ṣe. Mo bá jókòó síbẹ̀, mo lanu ilẹ̀, mo bá ń wò wọ́n. Ìgbà tí mò ń bọ̀ títí mo fi dé ọ̀dọ̀ Jimoh Aliu ni mò ń ṣe Lìádí kí n má bàa gbàgbé. Ṣùgbọ́n ìgbà tí mo dé ọ̀dọ̀ Jimoh Aliu mo ti wòran títí. Nígbà tí mo ti wòran tó mi, ó yẹ kí n tètè dódò ẹran, mo bá sá débẹ̀. Nígbà tí máa dé odò ẹran kọ́, igúnnugún lọ bí igúnnugún ni. Àwa máa rí igún bíi méjì bí ẹyọ kan. A sì máa kọrin nígbà náà ní èdè ìlú mi ní Ẹkùnrin Àkókó. Òkú ló gbàgbà ẹyẹ igán, òkú ló gbàgbà, òkú ló yẹn ní mo kọ́. mo ka igún tó 100. Ìgbà tí máa tún fi rántí, kí ni bàbá mi torúkọ ẹni tí máa ra ẹran lọ́wọ́ ẹ̀. Nígbà náà dẹ̀ ní àwọn mùsùlùmí tí mo gbọ́njú mọ̀ kò ju Mr. Suberu àti Mr. Umaru lọ. Mo máa ń ṣe Suberu, Mẹ̀múdù, Umaru. Orúkọ yóò jọ. Mo bá rántí iye ẹgbà tí máa jẹ́ dé. Bí bàbá mi ṣe máa fi ẹgbà ìdá bàtà mi sí lára. Mo bá bú sẹ́kún. Ọkùnrin kan wá rí mi, ó ní ta ni mò ń wá. Mo ní Suberu ni. Ó ní kò sí Suberu bí o. Ok, ẹjọ́ ṣé Umaru náà wà? Ó ní kò sí Umaru. Nígbà tó bá yá wá ní kí ni wọ́n ní kó rà? Mo ní wọ́n ní tí n bá ti dé ọ̀dọ̀ wọn. Lójijì ó kàn wá sí mi lórí pé wọ́n ní ọkùnrin ìwọ Alápàtà. Wọ́n ní ṣé Lìádí? Lìádí. Ìgbà tí máa délé wákàtí 5 ti kọjá, mo jẹ pàǹsà ìyàjọ́ náà. Ṣùgbọ́n ọ̀rọ̀ tí mò ń sọ yìí títí di òní, wọ́n á sọ pé ọkùnrin Ìjẹ̀ṣà, ọkùnrin Ìwó àbí ọkùnrin Yorùbá yẹn tán bá ti sọ bẹ́ẹ̀, Ọ̀yọ́ ni wọ́n bá wí. Ẹ máa bá mi ká lọ. Yorùbá as a collective began to feel a need to identify themselves as a single ethnic nationality who understands each other's language with minor dialectal differences after the 19th century wars against the Fulani. This war forced many people either into slavery or into refuge with neighboring groups. Bishop Ajayi Crowther and Reverend Samuel Johnson, who became educated in slavery, consulted with Hausa historians who were literate in Arabic and had books written by Muslim scholars like Ahmed Baba, where the name Yoruba was mentioned. They popularized the word as a description of the whole group in books like The History of the Yorubas by Samuel Johnson. Before colonialism began, the micro-national identities referred to in this lecture as sub-ethnicities in pre-colonial Yoruba territory engaged in invasive economic and territorial competition, which eventually led to a century of civil wars. As long as these wars lasted, the truths from the various wars, like the Kiriji War, provided no basis, nor did it create a catalyst for a pan-Yoruba identity. Samuel Johnson, in his book, The History of the Yorubas, explained that the 19th century Yoruba land was characterized by revolutionary political and economic changes. These changes stem from a series of constitutional and other socio-economic disruptions, initially in Oyo and later in other districts. The weakening of Oyo Central Administration after 1800, exacerbated by the spread of Islam and the expansion of legitimate trade, generated rapid political changes. The most important of which was the century-long Yoruba Wars. It is on record that Yoruba warfare attracted substantial scholarship within Nigerian academics and outside of it. Eminent scholars like Professor Saburibi Obaku, Bolanle Awe, Adebanji Akintoye, Ade Ajayi, Toyin Falola, and many more attributed these wars to attempt by various states to fill the vacuum created by the fall of Oyo. To this group, the wars were fallout of state formation processes in Africa. However, the Anthony Hopkins Economic School linked the wars to global economic movements, especially those associated with falling revenue from trade in slaves and later palm oil. Olatunji Ojo, in his paper, Ethnic Identity and 19th Century Yoruba Warfare, bridged the two schools brilliantly. He identified a major issue. And what is it? The Yoruba identity crisis. He wrote, peoples and communities occupy different strata within the social system. People were also classified based on ethnicity, class, age, and gender. Each of these identities are a combination of two or more that dominated the course of 19th century Yoruba. Therefore, whether with warfare, slavery, religious observations, or property ownership, there were these infractions. These were the issues, and these issues led to several questions. Who are the combatants? Who could be enslaved or not? Who could be killed? Yorubani at religious functions. The ways in which the people identify themselves and know how others identify them were at stake in discussions about political control, religious rituals, property relations, and how people fought the status quo. This state of flux within Yoruba sub-ethnicities created the initial onset of a boundary dynamics in what missionaries call the age of confusion in Yoruba land. J.D. White Peel, in his book, Religious Encounter and the Making of the Yoruba, wrote, the Yorubas struggled to hold on to what they could of old identities and patterns of living. As they fled into safety or were driven into slavery, they carried the springs of social identity with them in their names, praise poems, body marks, food taboos, dialects, languages, political and religious practices. As they settled down, they sought out others who shared their beliefs in their new settlements. So, the age of collective identity began in Yoruba land. These internal conflicts ravaged Yoruba land so much, it prevented no meaningful resistance against European colonial conquest. Àti bára wa jà, Èkìtì Parapọ̀ war, Kiriji war, gbogbo ẹ̀ ó ti rẹ̀ wá. Ìgbà táwọn Òyìnbó dé kò ságbára mọ́. The internal conflict ravaged us a lot. In 1861, the British established a protectorate over the port of Lagos and forced Ibadan to accept Hannah Ajele, a resident administrator, in 1893. Thus, colonialism began the gradual process of subsuming ethnic identities under national identities, which eventually will integrate Yoruba land into the geographic area that was carved to become Nigeria. This marked the onset of sporadic mega ìpọ́njú in Yoruba polity. Wíwá sínú orílẹ̀-èdè Nàìjíríà ló fa kíkó ẹran mérò. Starting with the establishment of Egbe Omo Oduduwa in London in 1945, under the leadership of Chief Obafemi Awolowo, we responded to colonial Iponju from whence a modern Yoruba identity began to emerge within the colonial and post-colonial nation-state dynamics. Egbe Omo Oduduwa as an umbrella organization to unite the Yoruba group gradually in importance in 1948 when heated debates over the future of Nigeria was beginning to emerge. Yoruba politicians, led by Chief Bode Thomas, worked within the organization to chart a specific course for the development of Western Nigeria. This started a process that transformed the group into a political party called the Action Group. The party was to serve as the vehicle for realizing its primary objective of mobilizing the Yoruba into one political umbrella and to implement the ideals and objectives of Egbe Omo Oduduwa. Egbe Omo Oduduwa shaped the contemporary Yoruba identity and it brought the Yoruba into focus, first as a socio-cultural concept and later as a political construct. From history, the Yoruba emerged as a contested concept, and it was in Iponju that it became an evident self-conscious entity. Yoruba as it's presently constituted is a pivot and an organizing metaphor of a very rich civilization. The question of Yoruba unity is often discussed to the exclusion of the fact that the evolution of Yoruba identity has a deep relationship with problems in the political landscape of pre-independence Nigeria. Our story cannot be about unity and inclusion without a distinct identity, which is embodied in a great complex of ideas and ideals. The lack of a grounded Yoruba core is the basis for a collective identity is predicated upon a fundamental ambivalence about the normative perspectives of a collective identity in modern polity as defined by participation and solidarity. We don't have that. Ẹnìkan kì í jẹ́ àwádé, àjèjì ọwọ́ kan ò gbẹrù dórí. The Yoruba as an idea is an expression of our cultural struggle with its own contradictions and conflicts. It can be seen as a social representation within a set of heterogeneous cultural forms. These social representations are reproductions of reality that are prescriptive, and they serve as controls for the formation of our collective identity. Can the Yoruba evolve a collective identity that is not based on ethnoculturalism alone, but also about economic and political integration? That is what Dikko Famakinwa is working upon. I don't think so. The possibility of a transcendental collective identity that is not predicated on the module is central to this lecture. My tentative answer to the question I posed is that the idea of a collective Yoruba identity that is not called into being by a country is possible if it focuses on a new notion of citizenship, participation, and solidarity to a common core. The Yoruba as an ethnocultural identity has always been invented and reinvented as an adversarial reaction to the pressure of new collective identities. For a forceful, united, unified, and purposeful identity, there must be ideals to live by that must never be broken, it must never be infringed upon, and it must never be dishonored. As of today, we have no such immutable ideal or ideas. We do not have a Yoruba spirit that is inviolable. It is incontrovertible that the cultural foundation of the Yoruba is rooted in our common heritage and ancestry from Ile-Ife, in addition to our humanist values and liberal outlook. without a unifying core, we must subject the Yoruba as an idea to critical reflection for it to become normative. Throughout our history, the Yoruba has been a product of conflict rather than consensus at every turn. There has been no unity in history except when we are confronted with Iponju. To counter this adversarial response to internal crisis, we need a soul around which Yoruba identity can be crystallized. We need a moral dimension which is capable of articulating an identity and the recreation of our presence as a culture and a nationality. The history of the Yoruba people is the history of its unifying culture, ideas, frontiers, as well as its divisions, both internal and external, and how it emerged in the configurations of power and geopolitical complexes within the post-colonial Nigerian space. Without question, the Yoruba as a geographic group is constituted by history and constitutive of its own history. As narrated earlier, Yoruba identity did not exist prior to its definition and codification. We also know that this cultural space we call Yoruba was marred in irresolvable conflict of sub-ethnic cultures and oppositional collective identities before its construction. The idea of a modern Yoruba was constructed with strategic, cultural, and political goals in mind. And the reality that it represents is also used strategically. From the foregoing, we can visualize the ethno-cultural space as known as Yoruba as an idea, an identity, and a reality, and that forms the core of my thoughts. Which means the Yoruba as a nationality is a structural force in which ideas and identities are formed within the existing historical realities. Evidence from pockets of Yoruba culture in West Africa, South America, and some parts of North America bears witness to the Yoruba as a product of a complex civilization that transcends the current region and polity. The evolution progressed as an idea and an identity that evolved as a cultural frame of reference, a geopolitical reality, and later as a self-conscious political bloc. The transformation and the cultural shift that happened with it is conjoined with its ethno-cultural values, with real effects on collective identities. With all these great philosophical arguments and principles, the Yoruba is in want of a governing ideology. We do not have a comprehensive system of thought, a unified program for the future, and we do not have a definitive political doctrine for mass mobilization. This is what is called an ideology. We will have an ideology where we attach our geographic space with concrete political interest. We cannot borrow this ideology. It must be organic. It must be homegrown. Àwọn àgbàlagbà sọ pé àwọn iná owó kò yẹ ni àgbàbọ̀ ṣòkòtò kò yọmọ ènìyàn bí kò fúnni lẹ́sẹ̀ aṣọ ohun ẹni ní bá ní mu. The task before us is to use our cultural ideas as part of political identity building processes for them to become ideologies. This generation must rise to the occasion and form a cohesive collective identity in which the Yoruba idea, the identity, and the reality becomes a kind of consciousness. We must adopt to what Pius Adesina on this platform called the Atumbi paradigm. We must be born again. It is an urgent necessity because it was colonialism and conquest that unified Yoruba land. It was not peace, and it isn't solidarity. Ìkòkò tó máa jà táwọn nídìí rẹ̀ àkọ́kọ́ gbóná ta ló mọ orin yẹn. June 12 remains one of the most remarkable dates in Nigeria's political history, as it has shaped Nigeria's successive elections and democracy. The June 12 was our catalytic Iponju. The 1993 presidential election, widely acclaimed free and fair and won by late Chief Moshood Abiola, was annulled by General Ibrahim Babangida-led military regime when efforts to stop the election failed. June 12 became a catalyst for Yoruba Iponju identity, as it reminded us of our identity as Yoruba within Nigeria as a country. As a result of the annulment, we felt cheated, and Iponju acted as a catalyst for the reordering of our political priorities. The June 12 Iponju gave the needed bite to the Afenifere. The Afenifere was formed earlier in 1993 as a social-cultural organization for the Yoruba people. It had Abraham Adesanya as its leader and Chief Bola Ige as deputy leader. Other founding members were Paul Nosanya, Chief Ruben Fashionti, Adegbonmire, Okunrohun, Ganiu Daudu, Olaniwan Ajayi, Olufalaye, Adebayo Adefarati, Alhaji Adeyemo, and Ayo Adebanjo. Iponju galvanized the Afenifere and the entire Yoruba such that when the Alliance for Democracy political party was formed in 1998, it adopted the Afenifere agenda as its official manifesto. As soon as the AD won in all the Yoruba states, everyone retreated into their sub-ethnic caves until the next Iponju came along. Of course, Iponju is a constant in life, and the ill-prepared are often taken unawares. Iponju came again. When the People's Democratic Party in 2003 made an attempt to create a one-party state, it used sophisticated chicanery and garrison politics to win the Southwest. Only Tinubu and Lagos stood as lone survivor of the political onslaught. The loss of Ondo, Ogun, Oyo, Osun, and Edo states in 2003 elections created the atmosphere for rancor and split within Afenifere. The politics was bitter, and the level of treachery within the ranks grew. It became a classic situation of Adabakofo, Jesofo, Orofo, Onikaluku, Jesse of Arare. Some political juggernauts emerged from the ashes of the election loss. The loss reshaped Yoruba politics, and Yoruba bọ̀ ní àkùkọ kékeré kò gbọdọ̀ kọ níbi tí ńlá gbé wà. We are still paying the wages of the split today and facing the consequences of it. In 2008, the Afenifere Renewal Group was formed with the stated intent of reuniting the feuding factions as an alternative to the faction headed by the older generation of Nigerians and the Yoruba leaders. Once again, Yoruba forgot the long adage that says, "Àgbà ní jẹ orí àdán, ọmọdé ní jẹ orí ẹyẹkẹyẹ." It is the elder who must be prepared to undertake difficult tasks. After each Iponju, we again retreat to our sub-ethnic identities and caves until the next Iponju comes along before we start scampering. To give honor to whom it is due, the unity of an essentially Yoruba tradition is a pervasive assumption underlying the visions for the Yoruba by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, Dr. Oni Akerele, Chief Akintola Williams, Professor Saburibi Obaku, Chief Abiodun Akerele, Chief Ayo Rosiji, Chief Bode Thomas, Sade Emma Alakija, Chief H.O. Davis, Dr. Abayomi, and Dr. Akinola. After the June 12 Treasury, Chief Abraham Adesanya, General Alani Akinrinade, Chief Bola Ige, Chief Bisi Akande, Asiwaju Tinubu, Professor Wole Soyinka, and many unsung Nadeko chieftains held the torch for us out of the desolate darkness of that era. The words of our elders taught us that méjì nílẹ̀kùn bí kò ṣí sínú á ṣí sóde bí kò tì sínú á tì síta. With ever fewer options, a united Yoruba became tenuous because of their Afenifere split. As a consequence, the ARG adopted what I call the Igiarwe philosophy, based on the expectations and consolations of Tenibegiloju, where trees can regenerate after getting cut and they develop new branches and leaves. On social media, the Igiarwe philosophy is being championed by my brothers, some of whom are here. Professor Adesanmi, Omoyele Sowore, Dipo Famakiwa, Dapo Rotifa, Ayo Totin, and other powerful names and voices like Malami Adekunle Kaode, Ayo Jeniyi, Adekunle Almuftawa Adeite, Folashade Osun, Dotun Oyeniyi, and many others who are proudly Yorubas. In furtherance of the Igiarwe philosophy, so many young Yorubas, along with young people of other ethnicities, stopped the national Ipoju of the Jonathan administration, of which the Yoruba got the largest share. The National Festival of Ipoju by the Jonathan administration exposed the ugly underbelly of Yoruba politics. We seem to have forgotten that a kì í kórìíra atọ́kùn ká dìgbòdo egúngún. Those who should take charge prefer to collide with the masquerade. This time they collided with a leprous masquerade. But the Yoruba does not forget. The reason is not far-fetched. Ìrìkèrèkèrè ní di odò, ìrìwàwà ní di òjò, bí ọmọdé méje bá kọ oúnjẹ alẹ́ ní di ìjà àgbàlagbà. The fight was open, it was dirty, but there was much filth in the fight. Again, we do not forgive treasury of Yoruba land. For Yoruba Renaissance to happen, we must bow to a common inviolable core that must never be touched regardless of our differences in religion, sub-ethnicity, politics, education, and social standing. My recommendation is that we must build a collective identity based on unity, character, and integrity. As an immutable Yoruba ideal, a collective Yoruba spirit. This is based on the notion that the idea of Yoruba has always been linked to the values of Ìṣọ̀kan, Ìwà, àti Òtítọ́, which can be summed up as unity, character, and integrity. For a sufficient appreciation of these three values, I will go into the Ifa corpus. For reasons of time, I will dwell on Ìwà àti Òtítọ́. Bí ó tilẹ̀ jẹ́ pé ọmọ ìyá kan náà ni orí àti ìwà, ìwà ju orí lọ. A sì mọ̀ wípé òótọ́ jẹ́ ọjà òkúta, owó lọ́wọ́ ni à ń ra èké. Òtúrá òkúdá, ó ní òtúrá rírá bẹ́ẹ̀ ni òdírá. Àkòtìràjò bẹ́ẹ̀ ni òdájò, òótọ́ inú yóò ní ó lájẹkù jó oúnjẹ lọ. Ó dífá fún Ọ̀rúnmìlà tó ń ṣawo lọ sílùú irọ́. Òtúrá rírá bẹ́ẹ̀ ni òdírá. Àkòtìràjò bẹ́ẹ̀ ni òdájò, òótọ́ inú yóò ní ó lájẹkù jó oúnjẹ lọ. Ó dífá fún Ọ̀rúnmìlà tó ń ṣawo lọ sílùú èké. Òtúrá rírá bẹ́ẹ̀ ni òdírá. Àkòtìràjò bẹ́ẹ̀ ni òdájò, òtítọ́ inú yóò ní ó lájẹkù jó oúnjẹ lọ. Ó dífá fún Ọ̀rúnmìlà tó ń ṣawo lọ sílùú òótọ́. Òtítọ́ dé o, omi alẹ̀ Ifẹ̀, ẹni tó kù ń wò wọ́pọ̀. Ìwà, a lè rí nínú ẹsẹ̀ Ifá ìwòsàn Ògúndá. Ajá sunwọ̀n títí ó fi déyín, àgbò sunwọ̀n tírọ̀rọ̀, ajá ò ní rọ̀rọ̀, kárílé lọ rè má gbò wá. Adífá fún orí ààbò fún wa, níjọ́ tó ń bọ̀ wá sílé ayé ìwà nìkan ló ṣòro orí kan kì í burú tó fi dálẹ̀ Ifẹ̀ ìwà nìkan ló ṣòro orí ìbá burú tó yẹ dálẹ̀ Ifẹ̀ ìwà nìkan ló ṣòro. From antiquity, all Yorubas have shared belief in a universal God, Olodumare, and the Yoruba language, which we have in common. In contemporary times, Olodumare has become God and Allah in Christianity and Islam, respectively. I argue here today that our cultural foundation is predicated on our belief in God and our common language. Even though we were united by colonialism and conquest instead of peace and solidarity, our unity must be based on a framework of shared experiences, common goals, and a collective plan. We must appreciate that identity is not only our defining characteristic as a group, nor what we have in common, but that which separates us from others within the Nigerian nation state. The representation or presentation of others must not matter to us. What should be of concern to us is the nature of the difference that is being constructed because identities are relational. It is also important to distinguish between personal and collective identities. Being an Omoluabi is a personal identity, it's not a collective identity. Personally, we can all be Omoluabis and have the Omoluabi ethos, but we must subscribe to a collective Yoruba spirit of Ìṣọ̀kan, Ìwà, àti Òtítọ́. To my host, the Afenifere Renewal Group, I would like to say, kí ẹrú ó mọra ẹ̀ lẹ́rú, kí wọ̀fà ó mọra ẹ̀ ní wọ̀fà, kí ọmọlúwàbí mọra ẹ̀ lẹ́rú ọ̀run. Let the slave realize he's a slave. Let the pawn realize he's a pawn. Let the ọmọlúwàbí realize he's a slave of the gods. You are here to serve Yoruba land, do not expect any reward. In the end, I cannot do but galvanize you to the timeless composition and rhythm of the great cultural warrior and genius, the late Hubert Ogunde, who in his exasperation in 1964 wrote and performed the play Yoruba Ronu, Yoruba Think. In what was the first instance literary censorship in post-independence Nigeria, Ogunde delivered a biting attack on the premier of Western region, and his company was banned from the region. His exhortation is as relevant then as it is now. My parting words to the Afenifere Renewal Group and the Yoruba nation is that we must share our Ikanju identity and subject ourselves to the inviolable and immutable ideal and core, the Yoruba spirit of Ìṣọ̀kan, Ìwà, àti Òtítọ́, Yoruba Ronu. It's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.